Welcome to Human Potential at Work, the show where we explore social impact, inclusion, and empowerment of everyone, including persons with disabilities. Get ready to be inspired, hear success stories, and learn tips and principles for bringing out the best in everyone.
Hello, everyone. This is Debra Rue, and this is Human Potential at Work. I'm the CEO of Rue Global Impact, and I'm excited to talk about the next guest. Can we really make our city smart? And what does that even mean? And I would think making a city smart means that we all get to be included. So we are lucky today to have Karen Tamley, who is the Commissioner of the Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities in Chicago. And in my opinion, and a lot of other people's opinion, she is leading the way. And she works with a couple of other cities, but Chicago, under her leadership, is really leading the way of making sure that smart cities and all smart projects include all of us. So, Karen, welcome to the program today.
Thank you for having me.
So, Karen, tell us a little bit more about who you are, and then please tell us more about the really amazing work that you're doing in Chicago.
Sure. Thank you again for having me. I'm the Commissioner for the Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities for the City of Chicago. I work under our new mayor, Lori Lightfoot, and I'm really excited to work with our mayor to help make Chicago the most accessible and inclusive city for people with all types of disabilities that live, work, or visit Chicago. So we work on a variety of initiatives, everything from providing direct services to doing, broad disability awareness and education to making sure that our city is fully accessible and compliant with federal, state, and local accessibility laws and codes. And we also work on a variety of policy initiatives and legislation to ensure that the needs and issues of people with disabilities are part of everything that the city does. So,
That's sort of unusual, though, Karen. I don't see many cities really thinking about how do all of our citizens get included. Why does Chicago care about this?
well, I think Chicago was one of the first cities in the country to establish a mayor's office for people with disabilities, and that was established under our previous mayor, Mayor Daley, right around the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act, where, he had a very strong commitment to disability issues and disability rights and felt that it was critical to have a cabinet level mayoral appointed position that would advise the mayor and other city departments on how to make Chicago um, fully accessible and inclusive. As we know, disability is one of the fastest growing segments of our population. And so it's absolutely critical that we ensure that everything the city does, from providing services to information to events, um, includes the voice of people with disabilities. So our issues truly cut across almost everything that the city does.
And Karen, why is this your career? Why is this something that's important to you?
Well, I was born with my disability. I've used a wheelchair all of my life. I grew up in a time before the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act, a time where there was very few expectations for people with disabilities, very little accessibility for people with disabilities a separate school because I wasn't able to go to my neighborhood school. And so, you know, I think this is something that has always interested me in a way that, how can I bring my personal life experiences to this role as commissioner? And I think having someone in a position with lived experience makes what we do here more powerful, more authentic, um, and can really truly help move accessibility forward in all regards, not just accessibility for those of us who use wheelchairs, but across the board. And that's really my mission is to make our world better than when it was when I grew up.
Right, right. So we all can be included. So, Karen, when I think about a smart city, there seems to me to be a lot of moving parts. We are doing this interview as Dorian is, you know, devastating the Bahamas and heading to Florida. And I just think that's another thing that you would have to be thinking about. You would have to be thinking about what happens with natural disasters if something happens to. There just seems to be so many moving parts to really be a smart, inclusive city. So, do you mind just exploring some of the pieces that you're trying to get your hands around to make sure that Chicago is the smartest, inclusive city, but also a role model for other cities as well, so we all could learn from each other?
Sure. I mean, I think the definition of accessibility is evolving, right? So 10 years ago was really about making City Hall and city services physically accessible and programmatically accessible to people with disabilities. Now you can do business with a city government, get information, apply for a permit, um, find out about local events, get notifications about emergencies, all in the digital space. So it's really transforming in many ways to virtual city hall. And so as we think about that, we have to think about how are we making that experience fully accessible and inclusive for people with all types of disabilities. And so I think this is really kind of the next generation of accessibility that it's critical that we as cities really start to focus on. And so I think, looking at Chicago as a smart city, it's really about how can we be using and deploying technology and using data to make our city more efficient and in many ways more accessible for our residents. So we have been committed for many years now to ensure that our digital offerings are fully accessible to people with disabilities. Our websites, but now city services are being offered through mobile apps, mobile 311, notifications, neighborhood payment kiosks, bus tracker. Think of all the ways that we're using technology in our cities to get around and to get quick, fast information. And so, it's rapidly changing. And so it's really critical that we're thinking about, how are we ensuring that people with disabilities get equal access? Because as we know, technology can completely, liberate the lives of people with disabilities and make our lives so much easier. But at the same time, if it's not accessible or you don't have access to technology, you're going to quickly be left behind. Right. And I would say, that is a big concern, certainly.
Yeah, there's so many different things that have to be done, but it also, as more of us, we're aging society, and this for the next few years, every single day, 10,000 Americans every single day will turn 65. Mm-hmm. And I find that people that are aging and acquiring disabilities are not always in these conversations. That's one thing that G3ICT and Enabling, I know that you've worked with them, and that's I had the pleasure of moderating a panel that you were on talking about your work, and Karen goes all over speaking about this as well. She'll tell us in a minute about an event that she's going to be in Atlanta with two other cities that are trying to be smart. But Karen, I find that my husband, as we've aged, my husband has acquired a significant disability with dementia. And it's become very real to me, the struggles that Americans that are aging and acquiring disabilities are having, because often, even though there's technologies out there, the family members don't know where to turn. There's a lot of confusion with the aging market. And I know that everything you're doing with the smart cities is also trying to address that part of the population where there seems to be more confusion. And I don't know if you're seeing that in Chicago as well.
Absolutely. We are an age-friendly city, And I think with that, we have to talk about being a smart, accessible city on top of that, right? Because as our population ages, we are living longer and aging with age-related disabilities. Um, and so when we make our products accessible, they're going to be good for everybody, for the broadest, number of our residents and visitors. And I always say that the work that I'm doing to make Chicago accessible isn't just about those of us living with disabilities now. It's about all of us or someone we love, right, who are going to have a disability and need some type of accessibility feature, right?
Right.
Whether it's magnification or assisted listening or physical accessibility, um, what have you. This is the trend. We are going to see an explosion of, of people with age-related disabilities. And it's critical that we as cities start thinking about how we're making all of our products and services accessible for the broadest range of people.
I agree. Do you mind just speaking for, once again, wonderful speaker, highly recommend her as a speaker, but can you just talk for a minute about your upcoming speech in Atlanta?
Sure. So Atlanta is going to be hosting the largest smart city expo in the country. I understood there's about 12,000 people registered for this.
Yay.
It's going to be really big. So myself and the Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities Commissioner for New York City and for Los Angeles, the three of us are coming together as the nation's three largest cities to talk about digital accessibility and inclusion and what we're doing to move the needle forward for our residents with disabilities. And so I'm really excited about this opportunity because I don't think that this issue is talked about enough in these circles. I think we're only really starting to have these conversations. And what I love about it, it's not that we're preaching to the converted. We're not preaching to, at a conference that's focused on accessibility or disability. This is a whole new audience where it's going to be, folks that are working on smart city initiatives across the world. And, we need to make sure that the message gets out there about the importance of including everybody, and that includes people with disabilities. So I think it's a really fantastic opportunity.
And I know that you've spoken with these two gentlemen before, because, yes. and I'm forgetting, but somebody had said it was one of the best speeches they'd ever heard on the topic. They said that you were just, as a panel, you were just really amazing. And so I'm hoping the three of you will speak more, because you're speaking at the same but different too. Los Angeles is different from Chicago and different from New York City. So, but how exciting that we're having these conversations in the United States.
Yes.
But Karen, let's talk just for a minute about some of the moving parts, because in my mind, I start immediately thinking about some of the moving parts, but I have a feeling I'll probably miss a bunch of them. And so I'd like you to talk about the different moving parts. And then it also, I want you to, at some point, what if I'm a city listening to this, whether I'm in the United States or outside the United States? Where do I even begin? How did you even begin? So just digging in a little bit more to the practicality and the tactical part of it.
Sure. I think for Chicago, one of the most important strengths of our work has been the relationship between myself and my office and Chicago's Department of Technology and Innovation. And having that commitment and that leadership, not just from this two department commissioners, but also from the mayor, I think is number one, is just that leadership and that commitment from the top. One of the fortunate things that we've been able to have happen this year is that through our work with G3ICT, Chicago was selected as the first city in the world to pilot their digital inclusion maturity model roadmap, which is really a roadmap for how our city can become a mature digitally inclusive city for people with disabilities. Um, and so we had a team of experts come and meet with us over the course of several days. And, we have now this kind of roadmap assessment that's been done on Chicago, looking at various key indicators such as like our vision, our culture, our procurements, our technology, our use of data, and just really ranking us and providing us really constructive feedback about how can we do better to take it to that next level around digital inclusion. So for us, that's been extremely helpful to lay our roadmap forward. And I think this is going to hopefully be a model and for other cities in terms of what they can do to similarly move their cities forward around digital inclusion. But I would say probably like just a few of the most important things for us has been, again, that message from the top, the working relationship between the two commissioners of the two departments and the commitment, but also the engagement of the disability community, because I'm a really firm believer that we have to be working with the disability community. We have to be getting the input of our end users, right? Just because I have a disability myself as a wheelchair user doesn't mean I fully understand what it's like to navigate the city as someone who's blind or low vision or deaf and hard of hearing. And that too goes for how we deploy our technology. Is it really usable for our community? And I think we gleaned a lot of great kind of not just best practices, but really making sure that what we put out there is fully not just compliant, but I would say usable for our residents and visitors with different types of disabilities. So for us, I think those are really some of the key things, is that leadership, that vision, and then the engagement and the partnership with the disability community.
And so I, with all these moving parts, we want to make sure the voting is accessible and schools are accessible. And I mean, all these moving parts. Have
Right.
any of the, and we are talking about this from the lens of digital inclusion and built barriers. We want to remove the built barriers. And I will remind the audience, when you take these steps to make a city more accessible to people with disabilities and people that are aging and acquired disabilities, you make the city more accessible and usable for everybody. It's a win for all citizens. But have any of the technology providers stepped up to support what you're trying to do?
Yes, definitely. I mean, I think that's one of the advantages too of having a really clear message about that you expect compliance. So, we've adopted accessibility standards and required that of our vendors. And I think that's really helpful. And I think that's one thing that cities can do, because cities, can change the landscape just through their purse strings, right? Through what we purchase. If we demand and require accessibility in order to do business with the city, we can help change, these vendors and their products. And I have many examples of where that's been the case, where, a product is going to be deployed, a kiosk or something like that, and it's not accessible or not to the level of accessibility as we would expect. And so we're able to work with that vendor to then go back and make changes and make changes and make changes. And yes, that might be time consuming and sometimes expensive, but not only have we been able to get a product for our city that ultimately will be accessible, but hopefully we've changed the practices of that company for their next contract with their next city to make sure that what they deploy is going to be accessible, and they can talk about that. So I think that's the other advantage of looking at what are the different gatekeeping mechanisms that you can use as a city to push for compliance. So some of that is, education, just within city staff and those who have control over, for example, web content or purchasing of technology and things like that. Um, Procurement certainly, user testing, because like you said, the landscape is enormous. It's huge. And so really trying to get your arms around that can be very much of a challenge. And when you have, 30 departments who are all using, deploying, or putting up content as individual departments, making sure that it's accessible can certainly be a challenge. So I think that kind of circles back to that messaging from the top and the expectations that you have, but also building the confidence of your city and your city key staff around what does accessibility mean and how do I make it happen? And where do I go for help if I need it?
Right, which is just such a critical point. I can't even imagine all the moving parts, but I do applaud you doing it at the procurement level. And I know G3ICT is also supporting doing it at a procurement level, and they have some very interesting white papers and papers that talk about that. But if we get it at the procurement level, as you said, if we get it at procurement level, the next programs that they build, they can also build them more accessible for everyone and be in compliance because they did it for Chicago. So if you can do it for Chicago, you can do it for Richmond, you can do it for Tallahassee, you can do it for others. And so I think that is a true sign of leadership that, you're doing it, you're catching it there because it's a really big place to catch it. I know there's been some very interesting work in Europe and the UK doing it at a procurement level too. I think it's a very important point. How about the newer technologies? We hear things about the cool artificial intelligence and the way the machines are learning, and there's so many new technologies. How are you applying some of those new technologies to help you be as smart as possible in Chicago?
Well, I mean, I think really our role is to work with our Department of Technology and Innovation to ensure that whatever they're deploying is accessible. And so I think that's really, again, the key is to work with the department that is doing the work, that is deploying those smart technologies, whatever it might be, for our city, and making sure that the disability component, the accessibility component is front and center. I think cities do struggle with limited funds and tight budgets, and we don't always have the capacity to be maybe as innovative as we might want to be, or as you could be as if you were in the private sector. So I think that's some of the challenges that cities are also facing, is just budget constraints. And, it's getting your arms around everything and then dealing with how are you going to deploy your limited resources in a way that's going to achieve the greatest result for your residents.
And then celebrating your successes. I think it's so important to celebrate your successes along the way because this is a big undertaking and it's not an undertaking you do once. Oh, that was hard. No, this is ever changing, ever moving. I'm in Virginia and we're doing something. We're moving to a new technological system for people like my daughter with Down syndrome who has service providers, and everybody's freaking out about the technology, and they'll track you, and it's interesting sometimes how people go to the scariest part of what a technology could do instead of looking at the practicality of it. It's fascinating. So you have to deal with all of those things too, which I find fascinating. And then I heard that you were doing some wayfinding activities, and wayfinding I think is a very, very powerful thing to help make a city smart as well. So I don't know if there's any specific parts of the project that you would like to highlight. I know there's just it's just so big what you're doing, and there's so many moving parts.
And I think too, that's the way that as a city, you can also engage the disability community is using the community to help identify priorities, right? So the things we hear over and over again, like from the blind community, is indoor wayfinding. at really complicated venues like O'Hare Airport, or your convention centers, or your tourist attractions and things like that. And so that's some of the things that we are looking at is, testing different technologies that might be out there, um, to make it easier for, a traveler who is blind or low vision to navigate the airport. That's just one example of some of the things that we're trying to do. And it can take a long time because, um, what gets promoted as being accessible may not always be as usable as you'd like it when you try it in practice. So again, I have to keep going back to the importance of engaging the community and why that's so critical. There's one other thing I wanted to mention too, if I could, because I think this kind of goes to the issue of challenges, which is the issue of the digital divide. And I talked a little bit about this earlier, but I think that there's just different levels of inclusion and equity when it comes to the digital space for people with disabilities, right? So it's not just what are you deploying and is that usable and accessible, right? But can people with disabilities truly access things online? We know that connectivity in certain neighborhoods, particularly in our own city, is challenging from a cost standpoint. We know that purchasing a cell phone can be costly. And when people with disabilities are living in poverty at a rate twice that of those without disabilities, the affordability issue, I think, becomes something that we cannot, ignore when we're talking about this issue. Um, I am seeing more and more city services, government services in general, ones that people with disabilities rely on, only being accessed now online.
Yeah.
Public housing, reduced fare, you name it. And if people don't have connectivity, if they don't have access to a smartphone, if they don't have the digital literacy skills to be able to sign up for those city services, I think we're doing more to, cement poverty in some ways because they're getting left behind by the digital revolution, right?
Yep. I
And
agree.
so I think that's a really important piece in this whole conversation around accessible smart cities is at the same time looking at how we're addressing the digital divide for all people, for low income people and people with disabilities, because we could be doing more to isolate people because we're not thinking about that than we are doing to liberate them. So,
Right.
I think technology has both sides to it, right? It can be so liberating and make your life so much better and more accessible. And then on the other hand, it can really further isolate and leave you behind.
I agree. I agree. So, Karen, I know that I've already gone through the 30 minutes that I wanted to spend with you, but a couple of things. If I'm a city, no matter where I am in the world, and I want my city to be smart, or I'm a large, region or country, where would I even begin to have this conversation? And I know that one thing I'm seeing from Chicago is that you're showing leadership not only in Chicago, but taking this to other places like this Atlanta speech. And I know you speak all the time, but you're helping others to begin this as well. So where would you where would we even begin?
Yeah, I mean, I would first start a conversation with the disability community, get a diverse group of people with different types of disabilities in the room. And honestly, many, many, many years ago, this is where we started. And we started having the conversation with our own residents about what are the greatest challenges you face in accessing city services, online or, digitally. And that helped us get so much information, helped us think about things that we never thought about before. You could establish an advisory committee of people with disabilities and as a way to kind of help you in a cost-effective way, start to lay a roadmap. You could start with a commitment. You could adopt accessibility standards, WCAG. You could, there's a lot of great resources out there. G3ICT is one of them that has a lot of really good resources and information out there that you could start, getting information. But I think hearing directly from your residents can be extremely powerful and help you tailor kind of what are the gaps and what are the things you need to work on. Tailor your roadmap to your own city based on the feedback that you get from your own residents with disabilities. So just from a really basic level, that's how I would start.
And that's powerful advice. So Karen, how can our audience learn more about what you're doing in Chicago? I know you're on social media, but tell us how we can track what you're doing and continue to applaud and support what you're doing too.
Sure. So the website for our department is cityofchicago.org/disabilities. You can find out information on there, and all of our social media channels are on our website. So Shy Disabilities is our Twitter handle. But yeah, definitely like us and follow us, and check out our website would be the best way. So thank you,
Yes.
Debra.
You're welcome. And G3ICT.org has G3ICTs, and they're very heavily involved in digital inclusion and smart cities and the procurement, a lot of things, and good partners to both of us. So we're both fans of G3ICT.
Yes.
But Karen, thank you so much for your leadership, everything you're doing. I know it's work in progress, but I really applaud what we're seeing coming out of Chicago and applaud what they're doing in LA and New York as well. And I love how the three cities are supporting each other and learning from each other, and also learning what others are doing outside our country. So thank you for your leadership, Karen. We really, really appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Yes. So we'll say goodbye to everybody, and hopefully Karen will come back on again and give us an update. But please join me in supporting what Karen's doing, making sure that we really reward the efforts that the people that like Karen are doing to change the world, and support and applaud and celebrate this. So Karen, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.